Welcome to the 68th episode of the interview series, a production of One Week Critique, an Iowa-based nonprofit organization that offers educational resources and editorial support to students and teachers of the literary arts. You can learn more about us and our programs or support our work by visiting our website, oneweekcritique.com. Please like and subscribe to help us continue producing excellent content. I'm Jon Riccio, joined today by Catherine Broadwall, the author of Waterspell, which is forthcoming from Cornerstone Press this August. Fulgurites, another Cornerstone Press book from 2023. Got my copy right here. Shelter in Place, Spite and Dival, 2019, and other collections. Her writing has appeared in Bellingham Review, Colorado Review, Mid-American Review, and other journals. She was the winner of the 2023 Paula Svanken Creative Arts Award and the 2020 COG Poetry Award, and a finalist for the poetry categories of the 2021 Mississippi Review Prize and 2021 Hinch Literary Awards. She is an assistant professor at DigiPen Institute of Technology, where she teaches creative writing and literature. And Parable from Fulgurite was a teaching takeaway of, I think, January 2024, if memory serves. Her website is catherinebroadwall.com. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for featuring a poem from Fulgurite on One Week Critique as well. It was really, really cool. It was very special, and it felt amazing to have the poem get that very thorough and thoughtful read through. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's probably the only poem I've ever read where Kookaburra is just front and center, and you literally have a love connection in that poem and the sparks are flying, as anyone who has read Parable from Fulgurite will know, or they can go visit it on our website under the teaching takeaways. Well, I read an earlier version of Waterspell while piloting a class at Western Michigan University where you received your PhD. So we have so many little threads that connect us. It's interesting. And that class was called The Literature of Psychology, whose stories, poems, essays, and culminating novel, The Bell Jar, focused on addiction, trauma, and recovery. Facets of these appearing throughout your prose collection, a good number of Waterspell's entries rooted in media ekphrasis. Aspects of ritual, magic, and motif are the essay's primary chorus members, and I've annotated them with the same intellectual unfireness as when I was preparing for comprehensive exams, the most intense phase of a PhD program. And I mean, this is all in a day's work of fun for me. And I'm taking notes, I've got meta ideas, I've got
Wow.
early ideas, and this was just a joy to read and spend more time thinking about these questions. I'm a student of Waterspell, lucky enough to have an independent study with she who created it. Your author's note tells us the book was primarily written between May 2021 and May 2022, with a few revisions and additions made after that. The media you saw in and prior to this window serve as textual atoms to this project, and we begin Waterspell with an essay titled after my favorite cooking ingredient, salt. Now here's the opening paragraph. The first thing I see upon returning to the house, having spent weeks away, following my husband's walkout, complete with packed bag, like something from a sitcom, is the salt on the countertop. Big salt, rock salt, the kind used to garnish glasses. Looking to the right, I see lime wedges in the compost bin. Ah, I think, margarita salt, unwiped, uncleaned, sitting there in clumps like the remnants of something, namely our marriage. A free association exercise I did for Waterspell, probably on one of these pages here, right? I arrived at the following words and ideas: elemental, 21st century medieval, reservoir, and ruins, not the same as ruination. In what ways does your book touch on this list?
Yeah. Again, such a great question. So I'll just kind of go through them in order. So yeah, elemental, I think it's a great word for the book. I mean, obviously, like there's water in the title, and water is kind of a motif throughout the whole collection. But also fire, I think. Like there's a lot of fire imagery. Like again, I mean, like because the marriage ended somewhat abruptly. I mean, again, it was like obviously not a perfect, relationship where everything was like going swimmingly, but it did end sort of abruptly. So I refer to that throughout the book as like the explosion or like when
Mhm.
things exploded. And there's a candle motif. Like there's actually a lot of like fire in the book as well, as water. So I think like that was a good, yeah, like interesting observation. And also on the note of like elemental, I think um there is a lot of examination of like archetypes, I think. Archetypes in pop culture and older art than like, contemporary pop culture. But also kind of in terms of myself and other people. Like who are you when the chips are down? Like what are the actual, kind of like what are the elements of you when you are at your most sort of heightened or your most kind of, keyed up. So I think it's a great word in so many ways because it's about the elements that make up matter, but also like the elements that make up people. So yeah, I thought that was a great one. 21st century medieval. I love that. And again, right? I mean, yeah, I thought a lot about this, and I think I'll try not to ramble. But I think again, for those who aren't familiar with the book that might be watching this, like, yes, I think this is a great observation too, because I'm a big fan of fantasy. A lot of the texts that the book kind of bounces my own experiences off of are fantasy. So it's like there's, a bit of the medieval in some of those texts, right? Like I love role-playing video games. I love Marvel movies, things like that, which isn't medieval necessarily. But yeah, like there's this kind of fantasy thread, even though it's a memoir. And so I think in putting together this book, I was aware of some of the like, well, like, how do I want to put this? Like, I understand that I wanted this to be a piece of craft, right? It's like I didn't want it to just be like my diary. And again, like I keep a diary that's separate, that's like just for me, but like that's different than the writing I want to show to other people. And so I wanted it at all times to be something that would offer something to other people, not just something that would provide catharsis for myself. And I know that writing that is too highly emotional or too confessional can sometimes like put people on guard, like in the literary world. So I think the way that this relates back to medieval is like I kind of self-consciously was like, I'm gonna make this epic anyway. Like it felt epic, and like I'm not gonna shy away from that. Like again, I think this is a book that's like aware of some of the risks it's taking and like takes them anyway. So yes, again, I thought like, describing it as kind of like a 21st century medieval is like, great. And I hope, I mean, again, it's like I'm aware that that's a risk the book takes. I hope that it will resonate with people. But yeah, if it feels that way, it was deliberate. Reservoir. Yeah, I mean, I thought reservoir was so interesting, like too, as a word that you associated with this book, not only because of the water connection, but I think, to me, like a reservoir is like something, I mean, right? It's like a reserve. It's like sitting, waiting to be used or like tapped into. And I think that is such a piece of this book as well, right? Like one of my favorite moments, I guess, in the book is when I had this thought, like again, like when everything was kind of so chaotic, and I had this thought that was like, well, like what was all this studying for, if not to like apply it in your own life, right? Like I've studied literature for all these years. Like again, like I came to literature as an area of study in the first place in undergrad because I wanted to study what it meant to be human, and that was like the closest like degree you could get that fit with that goal. I thought at the time, and like still think, I think. And so it was like all this knowledge, all this reflection. Again, like I take stories very seriously and think about, kind of like, well, if I were in that situation, or like if I were this character, like here's what I would do, or like I really admired that this character did that, and like I hope I could do that if I were in that position. And this was like it, right? I mean, this was kind of like, all right, man, like you're in this spot, like what are you gonna do? And so I think all of that introspection and studying of narratives and studying of characters and things like that, like was the reservoir that was finally tapped, like when these life events happened. Um, And as far as the last thing you pointed out, ruins are not the same as ruination. I love that. I mean, again, there's a piece in there that actually, like, in one draft, like, came out and then got put back in, that has to do with ruins and kind of like stumbling upon like in your mental mindscape or like the landscape of yourself, like suddenly there's this ruin. Like there's like this chapter that is over, but it's not gone. It's not like it was removed from the landscape. It's just like you don't live there anymore, or like you don't visit that place anymore. So like, what do you do with that? And again, it was like, I'm glad we left it in ultimately. But I think absolutely I agree with your take of like ruins are not the same as ruination. I think like um I mean, there's a joke that I keep saying when people like have asked me about what this book about. I'm like, well, by the time you're 35, you should have a tragic backstory. And like, again, I don't know. I hope this will appeal to any reader of any age. I think this is a book I actually would have really taken a lot from when I was quite young, like a teenager. But I do think like when you come to a certain age, you probably have at least one ruin in you. And
Mm,
again, that's not the same as like wreckage or even necessarily damage. It just means you've moved on from something. Like there's like something in you that is no longer relevant, or not necessarily like part of who you are now, but like the trace is still there. And I think it can be, we can approach those in a variety of ways. But I definitely think the distinction between like what do you do with a ruin and how is a ruin different from like ruination is a great question. And I hope anyway that it's one that the book takes up. So yeah, thank you.
sure. Your essay Branches is an ekphrasis on the South Korean drama Crash Landing on You. It features in the essay a reunion with the person I have longed for deeply for decades, though I tamped the feeling down. Later on, I wanted to float down gently into your life. I didn't want it to be like the scenes in the movies where the spaceship is crashing into the ground and the windshield is covered in dirt and it's ripping up fields and everyone is screaming, I'm sorry. How much of Waterspell's drafting was floating versus the good kind of crashing that I would summarize as unstoppable keyboard meets immovable prose constraint?
Yes, thank you. Another great question. And again, like for anyone who, is not familiar with the book, yeah, it's like it takes up a 12-month period where I had, the abrupt end of a marriage, while I was living out of state from where I grew up. Things kind of again exploded because I had applied for a job back home, on the West Coast. I ended up getting the job, and actually even like, yeah, like coinciding with getting the job and being able to move back to my home, um, state slash town. I had been holding a torch for my like lost love for like 18 years, and had kind of again like told myself like I was too damaged and too much to like ever be with someone so pure. But I confessed that I had been holding said torch for him, and we ended up being together. We're together now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, yes, like so again, it was a big year, like lots to write about. Hence, and I mean, really, like that was what led to the creation of the book, right? Was kind of like so much life experience was packed into such a little space that I felt like I couldn't, I mean, it was like it was handed to me and I just like received it.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, as far as like this the tension between like yeah, like these words that were spoken to my lost love, being like like I love you, and like it turns out like you've kind of been holding a torch for me too, but like this is the most chaotic life experience I've ever been through, and like I'm sorry that like this is how we're coming together in this like period of chaos rather than like having it be something gentle, is like the plot point. And I think like yeah, like there's an exploration of that in the book. But I think, yeah, like as far as the writing of the book as a process of like floating versus crashing, I think it's such a great question. And again, like I thought a lot about this over the past few days after seeing your questions. I think like the thought I had was that, I mean, again, to kind of like try to put it succinctly, uh, these were some of the biggest feelings I'd ever had, right? Like good and bad, like tough and great. Again, it was like this just like swirl of life events that I had not been looking for. I mean, again, like despite all the drama, like I don't think of myself as someone who goes looking for drama. So it was a lot to like feel all at once. Um, so that is like the crashing side. I mean, again, it was like overwhelming, very overwhelming. Um, and I also am like a person who copes by intellectualizing. I'm a person who copes by writing. I'm a person who copes by thinking really hard, in addition to feeling really hard. And so, as far as the floating side, like I wanted, as all of this was happening, I really wanted to be intentional. I really wanted to act in a way that I would be proud of down the road. Like I didn't want to kind of let like, the fire side of things like burn away the good things. And so I think it was at all times, like the image that came to mind while I was, thinking about this question was like a firework in a glass jar or like a
Mhm.
glass orb. It was like, it was both for sure. Like it was a lot of heat that was somehow contained. So, that's again, like I hope I succeeded. Like that was my goal, was to honor both.
And it's perfect that you talk about fireworks. We're recording this on June 30th, and there's going to be a lot of 4th of July festivities quite soon. So, what a way to wrap that question up.
Oh, thanks.
One of your longer essays, Genre Studies, reads like a best friend the humanities can have. And I have some excerpts from it. I think even some of them were you talked a bit about a little bit earlier, but I'm just so just taken with how this collection came together that it's a day of reading and highlighting my favorite parts from Waterspell. Leo Tolstoy famously writes that happy families are similar, while miserable families are unique in their misery. But I wonder about this. I wonder what it does to the conversation surrounding happiness, unhappiness, and art. Not including the extra classes I devoured in high school, I spent 12 years studying literature and creative writing in academic settings. I joke with friends that I'm playing Pokemon with English degrees, trying to catch them all. If I were to include the years outside of classes spent teaching, reading, and writing, the number would be closer to 20, over half my life. I finally embraced the English major during my undergrad years because within my roiling indecision about what path to pursue was a single common thread: courses about literature, about stories and ideas, philosophies of life, discussions of what made a piece of art meaningful, beautiful, and enduring. Now, towards the end of genre studies, we shift to a cartoon from the 2000s. I myself have been wary of happiness. Watching Teen Titans growing up, I liked Raven more than Starfire. Watching Frozen as an adult, I relate more to Elsa than Anna. I am naturally more drawn to the quiet introverts who seem to brood and be cautious with their trust than the bubbly ones who always seem to have sunny answers. But is this just another dichotomy, an attempt at cleaving people from themselves? Doesn't everyone get to be both sometimes? Does joy always have to be framed as simple as easy? Now, the essay's closing sentences we have: I want to know if joy is as complex a phenomenon as sorrow. I want to study it, revel in it, bend my mind toward it. I want to see what makes joy tick. I want to know it as thoroughly as I have trained myself to know pain. What is Waterspell's greatest contribution to the field of joy studies?
Thanks. Yeah, again, like these are just also great. And I was really happy to hear that this piece in particular, like this excerpt that you pulled, resonated, because again, I think this is one of the risks the book is taking. It's like, um, I mean, we'll see, right? Like maybe it's not as big of a deal as I, am afraid it might be, or like sometimes I'm afraid it might be. But I think, and as another piece of this essay talks about, right? It's like it's tricky when you start writing about joy, I think, like because there's so much wrong with the world. And although the scale of this book is mainly personal, and kind of like looking at the microcosm, I don't exist in a vacuum. And none of the events that happen in the book exist in a vacuum. and again, I mean, like I tried not to tinker too much with the book after it was, drafted more or less in spring of 2022. But like political things happened in 2022 that are like, I briefly mentioned, and obviously a lot's happened since. So I think given the times we're in, it is tricky to write about happiness because I think it runs the risk of ignoring that. Or again, I mean, the phrase I use in the book is like toxic positivity, right? Like I do not want to be one more person being like, oh well, positive vibes only, like just like think your way through and like everything will be fine. Like that's not the goal at all. And also, like like the essay says, I think it's like something that has bothered me for a long time is this cultural narrative that facing the troubles of the world is at odds with being like having any sort of like happiness in your life, like that, like you kind of have to pick. That again, like if you take a break from looking at the tragedy of the world, then you are participating in toxic positivity. I don't think it's that simple. And I think lived experience would teach us that it's not that simple. And yet, like I hear that cultural narrative a lot. I hear it a lot. That, if you take even, an hour of a break from doom scrolling or whatever, that you're like participating in toxic positivity. So I think like again, like my academic training would indicate because I've studied so many things that it's like it's never as simple as it seems, right? Like it like merits our attention, it merits our scrutiny, it merits our intellect to try to be like, how do we do both? Like how do we like work towards the world we want to see without completely like giving into despair because it's so hard. I think that's a really compelling question. And again, like it's a question I'm still thinking about. Like I don't have, an answer to that because I don't think it's an easy question to answer. So I think like that study is ongoing and something I'm still really, really chewing on. But I think at least in the context of the book, and again, like dealing with like my own very small, piece of existence in my personal life, I wanted to again like take that really, really big question and at least apply it to myself, right? To be like, okay, again, I've existed as someone who, if my culture has offered me Starfire and Raven, like a very cheerful person and a more like gloomy goth type person, if I have to choose, I guess I'll be Raven, but like I don't feel like Raven all the time, but like I certainly don't feel like Starfire all the time. So like
Mhm.
how can I incorporate both of these? Like how can I again like continue to think really hard, but also like delight in the fact that like this lost love who I had kind of pined for and again like told myself I was too gothic for it. Like how can I like let myself experience like joy and happiness with him because like what if that's possible? I think a lot of it is just like asking like what is possible for you in your personal life if you relieve yourself from this assumption that you can't for whatever reason like experience happiness. Just like
Mhm.
what if like what if you can think really hard and feel the pain of the world and experience like bliss and euphoria even temporarily.
Nice. And that reminds me, there's a writing conference, community of writers out in the Tahoe region,
Mhm.
and Brenda Hillman is the director of it. And I remember I went in 2015 and then in 2019. And what I most remember about 2019 is she prefaced it. It's a week-long conference where you generate new work. And Brenda said, "This is your week of yes." And that was just positivity and but with real sustenance to it. And you left with 7 drafts feeling as if you had reconnected, in my case, reconnected with poetry, or in 2015, I had left with more material for an MFA thesis, but also for PhD portfolio applications and but it was just a writers conference that just flows with positive possibility.
Mhm.
And then it's kind of like, well, if you can magnify that, could you have a month of yes? Could you have half a year of yes? And what if you had a year of yes? I mean, and then as someone who's now getting the 18-month, those planners that go from July to the end of December, So how can you have 18 months of yes? And literally, I'm so excited because the first entry you can get on this 18-month planner is June 30th, 2025, which takes you all the way then to December 31st, 2026. So I'm trying to have now, what can I do every day to have some sort of change that may lead to that 18-month. And however, yes, because there's more than one way to define the word yes. I'm
Mhm.
coming to realize at this stage of the game.
Yeah, I love that. And I just think too, right? It's like I think I was inspired by like this book owes so many debts of gratitude to like other writers. I mean, it has like a huge like works cited section. In fact, like the as long as my dissertation probably. So it's like, you know, again, for those who don't know about the book already, it's like it's a book with citations, not just a memoir too. And I think like part of the debt of gratitude it owes is to writers who were saying like at the start of the pandemic and things like that, you know, this is in some ways it's like it was 2021, you know, like the tail end of kind of like the lockdown phase of the pandemic, but like it's some of the events in there were certainly sparked by the pandemic. And some of the writers I was reading at that time were saying like the only way we're going to get through this is with hope and joy and pleasure, and like those aren't frivolous, like those aren't, you know, soft, easy, or maybe they're soft, but soft is good. And maybe easy is not bad either, you know, but it's like again, like okay, you know, I don't know, just like there were people ahead of me, certainly, and people in whose footsteps I feel like I'm following by saying um, happiness and pleasure and connectivity and all these things are not antithetical to working towards a better world. Like they're part of it. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really important message.
Yeah. In the glass coffin, your ekphrasis on a Sleeping Beauty tarot card, you write of one marriage as sky howling before introducing us to dragons, which are among water spells motifs. And we touched a little bit on the fire motif earlier. And here's an excerpt from the glass coffin. It turns out if you are angry enough with yourself, you can transform into a dragon, the kind that breathes fire, burning everything in sight. That is actually a howl of pain. It turns out this can be taken for love, finding someone else whose screams are fire too. It turns out this can even look like stability. Two dragons curled around a castle, the true sovereigns in hibernation. This last sentence crosses one fairy tale creature with another fairy tale scenario. On that note, I think of video games as being fairy tales in waiting. And I'm sure other scholars have thought of this as well, but I'm following that spark and it leads me to an early personal computer game, King's Quest, 1984, designed by Roberta Williams. And in that game, you have a fairy tale cast, including Sir Graham and a witch. Now, how have the video game phrases in Water Spells shaped your ideas on digital folklore?
Yeah. As I mentioned, first off, I love the term digital folklore. Love that. But yeah, I mean, I think among the many things that the book is reflecting on, like doing these like ekphrastic pieces on, yeah, like some of them are on video games, namely Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy X, and Grease, or it's GRIS, which I would recommend for anybody. Like really, like that's. Have you heard of that game? Just out of
A little
curiosity.
bit through the collection.
Okay, yeah, it's very short. It's actually, I mean, I think you can get through that game in about 6 hours, and I think that is doing some really beautiful work on like defying people's expectations of what a video game can be, because it's wordless.
Mhm.
It's just tells the story through like sound and image and puzzles. It is based on the 5 stages of grief, so it's like five. It's like a side scroller, you know, like Super Mario, but like instead of Super Mario, you're like navigating a literal landscape that represents one of the stages of grief. And there are puzzles that go along with it that kind of mirror like each stage of grief. So again, it's not super long, probably 6 hours. Very emotional. I mean, like I like ugly cried playing that game. In again like ways I did not expect or anticipate. I usually don't like cry in front of a screen. I like you know, like I kind of like save it up and do that later, like elsewhere, like not like while I'm experiencing media. But there was just something so deeply visceral and again, I would say elemental about that game that I think anybody interested in like the intersection of poetry or just like literary things or capital A art and contemporary media, and especially video games, that one I would highly recommend. Again, something like Kingdom Hearts. I mean, like Kingdom Hearts is on the surface like a very silly game, and I think like again, in citing Kingdom Hearts, I was a bit self-conscious and a bit like, oh, like, my literary readers might kind of roll their eyes at Kingdom Hearts, or my Kingdom Hearts players might roll their eyes that I'm trying to like elevate Kingdom Hearts into something that's more serious than it is. But I mean, again, I don't know. That's just like the type of person I am and the type of mind I have, I suppose, that like I'm interested in bridging them. I'm interested in saying like what these two spheres have to say to each other. So I think something like Kingdom Hearts, a symbol like the Keyblade is very elemental. It's a giant key that he like uses to open giant doors that lead to other dimensions and things like that. It's also a weapon. It's like that's wild, and I feel like could show up in like the dream songs, and we'd be like, oh, that's so powerful, like a key that is a weapon, like but in Kingdom Hearts it's like, oh, Kingdom Hearts, it's so silly. So I don't know, I guess that's all to say. I think they have more in common than most people think. I would love to see more conversation between them, because I think there's some really interesting conversations to be had.
Nice. And when I think of keys, I go to my Zelda place because it's always like the Legend of Zelda, and I have not played that probably since the very early 90s, but I do remember there was some key action, and there weren't really keys in the Mario Brothers world from what I remember, but I do when I think of fairy tale type creatures, it's all about the Hammer Brothers for me. Back to Super Mario Brothers 1. So yeah,
Hmm.
interesting. Well, in the spirit of how this interview series came about, where we look at the early draft of a work and then the final draft of a work, we have the earliest draft of Two Toned, which is an ekphrasis on Pixar's Inside Out. So if you could walk us through with the magic of the shared screen, the first draft, and then we'll read the published version. And let's see. Okay, so we have the draft. Okay. So if you could read it, and then we'll just hop into the final version.
Sure. So yes, this was like the original. The pieces, the ekphrastic pieces were originally just titled ekphrasis on, and then whatever it is, ekphrasis or ekphrasis. I've heard it both ways. But yeah, ekphrasis on Inside Out. I think about John Keats' term negative capability, most simply defined as tolerance and acceptance of mystery, the way it makes room for ambivalence, the way it leaves space for complicated feelings, acknowledges the heart's twists and turns. Like the multicolored ball at the end of Pixar's Inside Out, made from happy gold feelings and sad blue tinged ones, emotions can sit in apparent contradiction but still make a certain sense. It's a sense that has nothing to do with logic. It moves to the rhythm of some other star. I did not want my marriage to end. I was also relieved when it did.
Okay, and then we will share the final draft.
Cool. So yes, it ended up this. I ended up giving like main titles to the ekphrastic pieces, and then having like the ekphrasis on as like a subtitle.
Mhm.
So this ended up being called Two Toned, but still kept the ekphrasis on Inside Out. So it didn't change all that much, but it did change a little bit. So it says now, I think about John Keats' term negative capability, the way it honors uncertainty and mystery, the way it makes room for ambivalence, acknowledges the heart's twists and turns. Like the multicolored ball at the end of Pixar's Inside Out, made from happy gold feelings and sad blue tinged ones, emotions can sit in apparent contradiction but still make a certain sense. It's a sense that has nothing to do with logic. It moves to the rhythm of some other star. I was not looking for my marriage to end. I was also relieved when it did. Um, so again, thank you for picking this piece because I think it is such a nice little microcosm of the collection. Like again, I mean, this is when I was sending out query letters and things like that. I was like, oh, like John Keats and Inside Out together at last. Like
Mhm.
what, Which I again, like I feel like it maybe will raise some eyebrows, but maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. But I think one of the things that changed, I mean, there are just a few little changes as you saw, but like one of the changes was the in case readers that had not heard the term negative capability before, like how do I succinctly define that without like going down the rabbit hole of like negative capability?
Mhm.
um, and then the last line, you know, the kind of like the punch. So as far as negative capability goes, I think the more I learned about that term, the I actually kind of like pulled back from saying, which is easily defined as, I was like, I'm not even going to try to define it.
Mhm.
And again, I suppose I should say too, you know, if it's not clear from the passage for any viewers who might, you know, not have heard that term before, it's almost like a trance state. It's like you kind of put yourself in like a trance where you're just open to the mysteries of the universe. And again, like you reach out with your intuition in order to understand or write or make art in some way rather than like using the part of your brain that might solve a crossword puzzle, you know. But again, I think it's very mystical, metaphysical. I think it's like it's not easily defined, and so I just backed up from trying to like defined easily as and just instead said what it honors, because I do think it
Mhm.
honors ambivalence, and I do think it honors, I think it like gets at for lack of a better term, like that state that I think, you know, most people have some experience in, where you're just kind of like, yep, this is the paradox within me, but you know, in the Whitmanian way, like I contain multitudes. You know, it's just kind of like it is what it is, and
Mhm.
like I feel this, and I feel its exact opposite. Like shrug. And so I think I tried to just leave it there. And then I mean, just a very like small, you know, couple grammatical things. Like we took away the quotation marks. I'd put it in italics just as a stylistic thing. We got rid of the slashes in the like happy and sad slash gold and blue
Mhm.
just because it was an easier reading experience. So little things like that that happened in the editorial process. And then the last line, you know, yeah, and I thought about this so much. And I wish I could say I remember exactly like when and why I changed it. I don't remember like the day that I sat down and was like, no, it's this. But I think the change was the spirit of the change was um I think want in the original, it was like I did not want my marriage to end. I was also relieved when it did. I think want, as I was writing this book, became such a like fraught and interesting and loaded term. I think want is like a tip of an iceberg for all kinds of emotions. So
Mhm.
it felt more precise to say, um, I was not looking like so like again, kind of like cerebrally, like if you had asked me, are Catherine, like, are you applying for this job on the West Coast so that you can like end your marriage and like, you know, like blow up your life? I would have been like, no, like, what do you mean? But that is, it's kind of like sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. You know, it was like, what's want? Like what, I mean, like that could mean so many different things. So it felt more precise to say consciously I wasn't doing that. Like consciously I wasn't like heh heh, you know, like strategizing. But I think like were my actions guided by want? Like obviously in some way, right? Like I took the initiative, like I applied for the job, you know. So I
Yeah.
think it just became more complicated. Um, yeah,
Mhm.
that's the easiest way I can say it. I mean, I think it's like it's a I will continue to think about this question.
Well, one of the more interesting synchronicities as I was reading Water Spell was that your writing on bibliotherapy coincided with my literature psychology courses, emphasis on the same practice. My students wrote extensively about this newer literary field on their exams. I would ask them to imagine, for example, that they had just opened their counseling practice, and I would have them design bibliotherapy libraries using four of the poems that we had read in class. And some of those poems were there were some Kava Akbar poems from the portraits series. There was the whole sequence of Heart's Needle, and it broke this Heart's Needle that none of my students wrote about. That I'm thinking it's epic because it was one of the first poems about from a man's perspective about being a co-parent, but no one wrote about that. But there was also some Anne Sexton on there, which they wrote about. But they had to summarize each of the four poems in their bibliotherapy library. And then they had to give me the reason for why they included those works. And they reflected on the takeaways and revelations that they hoped those poems would inspire bibliotherapeutically in their clients. And then they shared what takeaways and revelations the poems inspired in them. Now, along the lines of your essay, The Mind's Eye, you write, Bibliotherapy is the art of using stories to understand oneself and one's pain. Bill Ellis coins the term fairy telling to describe the weaving of new fairy tales inspired by older ones. In trying to piece myself back together, I suppose I am doing both. As to why so many of the images and stories that come to mind for me are fantastical, I suspect it is because I am delighted by stories of magic. I joke, half joke, that I want to create a major in magical girl studies. To reflect on these stories gives me pleasure in a culture that too often separates them from fine art. Reading reflections like Roxane Gay's on The Hunger Games, Carmen Maria Machado's on The Little Mermaid, and Jack Halberstam's on Monsters, Inc. gave me faith that this was possible, to write about these characters from a place of seriousness and care. As Jennifer K. Stuller writes, such stories, including superhero stories, contain powerful archetypes and other aspects of myths. These are the kinds of tall tales that might be told around campfires, their shadows stretching long. Generally, I view magic as a metaphor for power, and I want to know what mine looks like and how to use it well. I have less than no interest in literal violence. I read all these things symbolically. And a bit later, we're told, once I realized I liked poems and animation for the same reason. Anything can happen. Reality is elastic. Both are enchanted domains. This reminds me of a prompt that Tracy Brimhall designed when she taught community poetry workshops at Kalamazoo Institute of Arts back in the fall of 2012. And I'm wondering if maybe you overlapped the same time at Western Michigan University, because we would illustrate these poems by comic book paneling them. And I chose Ezra Pounds in a station of the Metro, and my art looked like Pac-Man ghosts. Speaking of ancient video games, these little Pac-Man ghosts, it's like they were turned janitors. And I'm wondering, have you ever illustrated or storyboarded anything from Waterspell? And those drawings, if I'm getting all my Greek words right, it resulted in meta ekphrasis.
Yeah. Like, yes, first of all, I was fortunate enough to be at Western Michigan at the same time as Tracy Brimhall, and she is great. I admire her writing so much. So yes, like, and in fact, yeah, I wanted to, mention her latest poetry book, Love Prodigal, later on too, because it's just amazing, and it's also, has a few themes in common with Waterspell, and it's just like, yeah, like amazing reading experience. Yes, I mean, so many great things, like the storyboarding. I was also curious to know, and maybe we can talk about this like later. Like, I don't know if the interview is time, but I was curious to know your 4 poems, like that you would prescribe. So I don't know if you're curious. And I also like wrote down mine just like super quickly because I thought that was such an interesting prompt. Like, if I were gonna like prescribe 4 poems, to the world or to a group of students, like just like really quickly, I thought of What the Living Do by Marie Howe.
Mhm.
I love that poem. I think like the idea that like we have a kind of ability slash responsibility to like remember those who are gone, is beautiful. I put Instructions on Not Giving Up by Ada Limon, as a kind of instruction in resilience and like again just kind of like taking life as it comes. Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden, love that poem. So much, I think, again, like I think that is a poem with a lot of negative capability. Like the speaker is like talking about this kind of like a parental figure who he has like mixed feelings toward, and who is maybe, like not the warmest person, clearly, but still a lot of like love and humility and gratitude is in that poem. And then Thanksgiving by Amy Nizuku Mitatil. I love that
Mhm.
poem. Do you know that where she, like her husband saves the cricket from the fire?
Mhm.
So great. Well, they're hypothesizing, but in this like thought experiment, he's like, I would save the cricket from the fire, and she's like, that's what I do. That's the guy for me, kind of. And I just love that as like um a reflection of love. So I think those would be my 4 like bibliotherapy poems right now. Um, Anyway, to get to your question about, did I illustrate or like storyboard anything from Waterspell? Like, not officially, and this sort of grieves me. I had visual art ambitions when I was younger, and like, every once in a while, I'll toy with the idea of coming back to them. I have kind of like a chronic pain situation in my shoulder, which is this is my dominant hand, that has prevented me from doing more visual art over the past decade or so. But that said, I do, I think because I have like a, I mean, I've never been tested for it, but it's like I would say I have synesthesia and hyperphantasia, which is like,
Mhm.
you know, synesthesia is like where your senses cross. So like again, emotion and like images, like I like my emotions and like mental pictures are very intertwined involuntarily. Not every single emotion, but like strong emotions, like I'll get like a picture in my mind. And so certainly for parts of the book that are more lyrical, right? It's not just a matter of like, oh yeah, like here I'm writing about this memory. I can still picture like, you know, where I was standing and things like that. Like that's one form of it, like storyboarding, but more like some of the lyrical parts, because this is a book written in lyric essay. Like some of them are like, I had this, you know, like I had this dream or I had this kind of like impression of this experience. And those, if I were an animator or if I were a filmmaker, or a comics artist or something like that, I absolutely like could panel them out in my mind. Um, for sure. I just like I have not done it literally because shoulder pain.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah.
Well, now you've got me thinking about mine, and I'm just off the top of my head, I would probably Layli Long Soldier's Obligations 2. It's in that
Hmm.
diamond shape, and you can read it about 18 or 19 different ways, but there's one consistent line where it talks about grief, the grief, the grief, the grief, the grief. And I
Hmm.
love showing that poem to my students because it shows them that you can build a poem. It's literally all the interpretation is all on you. There's, as I tell, the only interpretation in my classes that matter are the ones that you bring to the table. So you build that word by word as associatively or however you want to with that long soldier poem. And I would say probably Rigoberto Gonzalez's Unpeopled Eden. It's a sectional poem and it talks about a historical tragedy in the late 1940s and it deals with a plane crash of immigrants who are being forcibly deported. And it's just the way in which he tells their stories. And I think that is simpatico with the Marie Howe poem that you had talked about. I would also probably anything, maybe a whole collection by Patricia Smith, maybe should have been Jimmy Savannah or Tea House of the Almighty. She was a poet I studied with early on, whose major emphasis was basically if there are things you have to say, but something's holding you back, just get over your wall. And that's how you don't ever want your traumas to have been in vain. And so she just, I think I heard that from her in summer of 2013, and that just was a little kernel that kind of just popped in my MFA. And then I guess I took the Orville Redenbacher version in to take the popcorn metaphor. I guess I went full Orville Redenbacher in my PhD with it, and that's what led to Agoriography, the collection that grew out of that dissertation.
Wow.
And then just for the absolute oh my goodnessness of it, goodnessness, John Ashbery's Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror, just because of the way there's the time, there's the way that I mean, if you've seen the 1975 book cover, it's just basically I think it's Parmigiano looking at that self-portrait, and I'm a big stickler when it comes to the anniversaries of collections. So I remember in 2021, it was the 50th anniversary of Anne Sexton's Transformations. So Fairy Tale Review had the gold issue was themed around that. And this year, I believe 75 to 2025 would be the 50th anniversary of, I think the poem came out in 74, but I think the collection itself was 1975. So if you think about what people are saying in terms of how revolutionary that collection was, so it's just the John Ashbery cake. We now have 50 candles on it as far as what this work what the collection as a whole has done. And there's even, I remember when I was prepping for my comprehensive exams, just studying the individual poems from that book. Lithuanian Dance Band was one that I had a lot of note card verbiage taken on just so that I could memorize key sections of it. And also, if I could do a fifth one just to sneak it on there, I would say the Delirium Waltz by Mark Strand because it hybridizes prose and the pantoum. And what it does is you're going backwards through time, forwards through time, and just being in the present. And the way that you have multiple chronological happenings over the space of two forms of poetry. And I mean, so it does have the prose, which would be like a perfect conversation piece with Waterspout, but it does have the pantoum. And I am I remembering that in Fulgerite there were maybe some poems that had received forms in there, like a
I
sonnet,
don't think so,
or maybe
but
I'm, or,
I mean,
or but it's just
yeah.
I think there's a beauty of received forms. So
Hmm.
Sestinas
Hmm.
and Villanelles and Hustles
Hmm.
and Pantoum. So it's just, and the thing about Mark Strand is I saw him give a reading in 2014 at the New York State Writers Seminar, the Skidmore one up in Saratoga Springs, and everybody, I guess he was famously the Clint Eastwood, like a doppelganger for Clint Eastwood of poetry. So it's like Clint Eastwood is reading his poetry today, and it's just I just remember though the Delirium Waltz was something that I took to heart as I again it was something I wanted to write about for comprehensive exams because I'm also as a poet just obsessed with the idea of time, and I've actually proposed ideas of classes built around time travel, but however you define what it means to travel through time and however you experience time. And Unpeopled Eden is also on there because of what it does with the nature of that historical tragedy. That's just, it's stuck. The horrible event happened in the 1940s, but here we are, 70 going on, approaching that 80 years later of it. And it's poetry is archive, poetry is preservation. And
Hmm.
those were thank you. I do love thinking extemporaneously. So that's
Hmm.
awesome. They're right here, jotted down on the old interview sheet. And we come now to Labyrinths, which is an ekphrasis on WandaVision and Amelie. And that was especially enjoyable for me because it's centered around Wanda Maximoff, who the Scarlet Witch by any other name. And it introduced me to Amber Sparks's term domestic fabulism. And that's where literature borrows elements from fantastical genres, but situates them within the setting of the home. It can reveal, Sparks explains, the precarious balance between domestic belonging and alienation. My favorite comic book memory of the Scarlet Witch is when one of her hexes aids in defeating the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. This is Avengers Annual number 10, 1981. And if I have any Rogue fans in the house, you all will know this is the debut of Rogue, except she's a villain, and she we meet her absorbing Captain America's powers and Thor's abilities. This is after she forever absorbed Miss Marvel's, aka Carol Danvers, her flight, body armor, psyche, and sixth sense. So Water Spell also ekphrasticizes the Captain Marvel movie, and it leaves no Carol Danvers power struggle unturned. And if you go back to the end of Avengers Annual number 10, this is after Wanda's helped defeat the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. They're part of that plot of Avengers Annual number 10. It involves a prison break on Rikers Island. And so I guess they're back in Rikers Island doing time. Mystique obviously gets away because she can shapeshift. So I think she may even take off in a jet, and Rogue can fly away. But at the end of Avengers Annual 10 and in Uncanny X-Men issue 153, Carol Danvers is a mansion guest of the titular mutants. And I'm thinking, okay, this is totally domestic fabulism. And if you know, okay, so Danvers, at that point, she's been reduced to a blank slate. She's had her powers taken away. Rogue has absorbed all of her memories and emotions, but Professor X helps her get it back because, I mean, for Danvers, but still, throughout those 1980s appearances of Carol Danvers, the former Miss Marvel, she's just she does not have the connections to go along. If she sees a lover or if she reminisces about a lover, she can't feel the heartbeat for that person. Um, she's only in this domestic fabulism for a short time because in X-Men 158, she is fighting Rogue and Mystique. And of course, this is when Rogue meets the X-Men for the first time, and she's going toe to toe with Wolverine, Storm, and Nightcrawler. But I could talk about Rogue all day. But well, this won't be about it. We could do a Rogue studies class too. But anyways,
Yes.
in the Captain Marvel movie, and I'm reading from your essay. The final showdown of the film is between Jan Rog and Carol, who stride toward each other in the desert, even after so many lies have been exposed. Indeed, perhaps because they have been, Jan Rog resorts to manipulation. He smirks at Carol, asking if she can face him without being ruled by her emotions. He tells her to turn off her luminous power. He mocks it, scoffing and berating her. But mid taunt, his speech is cut off. Carol fist beams him into a rock. She walks and stands over him, back against the sun. She is lit brightly from behind. Calmly, matter of factly, Carol says she does not have to prove herself to him. And it's interesting too because there's talk about gaslighting in this essay. So aside from labyrinths and the name of the essay with the Captain Marvel is with fists aglow, how else might readers triangulate Wanda, Carol, and domestic fabulism over the course of Waterspell?
Yeah, once again, really thought-provoking question. And I think, I mean, like, what came to mind for this is, and maybe it came to mind because this is on my mind in other ways too. But like the difference between high fantasy and like whatever the opposite of high fantasy is. Like I've heard it called low fantasy, I've heard it called urban fantasy. But like high fantasy is like it's in another world apart from ours. So like Lord of the Rings, or something like that. It's like it is not set in Earth, it is set elsewhere. At least as far as I know, like Middle Earth is not supposed to be Earth. Or like Game of Thrones is like, yes, like it's based on some historical events, but it is not on Earth.
They're in the book too. Yep, they're in the book too.
Oh, really? Like,
Game of
oh
Thrones,
yeah,
right?
Game of Thrones. The gnarly Game of Thrones. But which I had to stop watching on. I didn't make it through that show, but I did make it through the scene that is written about in the book. But yeah, like as far as like Carol and Wanda and domestic fabulism, like I think for me right now, as much as I truly do love high fantasy, and I do, but I've been paying keener attention lately to urban fantasy, for lack of, or again, kind of like earthly fantasy, where it's set in our reality. And I think certainly that's part, I mean, of what makes WandaVision, the show, so powerful to me. I mean, that is, I would say, like textbook domestic fabulism. Like most of that is set within a domestic space. And like a transforming and unraveling domestic space. So I think that show is just like fascinating
Mhm.
in its depiction of like that familiar, like, your couch and your bed and your television set and your cooking, but also like you are a witch and like things are not going the way you want, and so you're going to like use your power to like literally bend reality. It's like it's a fascinating kind of a power fantasy in a way. I mean, again,
Mhm.
like I think power fantasies straddle genres, but I think like looking at what we wish could happen in a domestic setting, or giving a fantastical metaphor to the feelings that take place in strained domestic settings is just fascinating. So definitely that one. I think like with Captain Marvel, I read that movie more as like about career. It's like, I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing as kind of like career fabulism. Maybe again a conversation for another day, but like I think that's such a it's like looking at the workplace and your coworkers and your like like boss as like domestic subject, or like not domestic but fantastical subjects. But same thing. I mean, I think like it's the stakes of both those stories are ultimately very relatable stakes, right? Like
Mhm.
like most people have someplace they call home, like most people have something they do for work or for income. And so either way, I think like part of the power of those narratives is that deep relatability to just like very everyday things.
Mhm.
Um, and as far as how it all relates to water spell, I mean, I think like, I mean, like I said in the passage that you read, like I'm very fascinated by magical girls in particular. I think um, part of my endeavor, like in writing this book, is to learn from magical girls in pop culture and in art in general. Like again, like the ekphrasis or the ekphrastic pieces are like on some male characters as well. But I think like I said, with this kind of true humility, as I was going through all of this, I was looking to characters that I admire in some way and being like, what did they do again, right? It's like it's easy to sit back and watch a movie and be like, oh well, like yeah, so Carol Danvers like learns that she was like gaslit to high heaven by this guy for years. Um, which like many of us have. And like how does she handle it? Like does she rip him apart? Does she like ignore it and bury it? Like no, like she does something else, right? Like, and I mean again, even though the ending of that movie I think has a lot of critics, I thought it was interesting, right? I mean again, like all I can do is say what I thought of it, but like to me I thought that ending was actually very powerful in its like understatement. Like a lot of people wanted like a big showdown.
Mm.
But anyway, like I hope that answers the question, but I think like I don't know, I just think fantasy that is set on Earth has something really unique to offer right now.
Well, and I think it's cool because again, as someone who read the comic books in the way back years, I know Carol Danvers just as Miss Marvel, but now she's Captain Marvel, which is like okay, some progress, right? And I I, I think the costume she last wore had a lightning bolt on it, and I think at one point Storm might have had a lightning bolt costume, maybe late 80s or early 90s. So it's just so the symbols of lightning bolts um and when you get into the comic book universe with Wanda, and I think in one of the Avengers movies, she's got the Quicksilver brother, but he die in one of the Avengers movies. And I don't even know if any of the television adaptations have touched on the fact that her father is Magneto, and by virtue of that, she's got a half sister, Lorna Dane, aka Polaris, with the cool green hair, who can control any sort of form of magnetism, which is really cool. And I just like, I guess I want to just lobby more for people to learn about Polaris and just because I just the ability because Magneto also has energy control, so I'd assume that Polaris finally has those abilities too. So a lot of power in the Maximoff and Eric Lancher, I think is Magneto's real line. So just with real names, so within those bloodlines, there is power there, and so I think that's kind of like a genetic fabulism, right? With just those mutants and the
Mhm.
way that it's passed down, and how you have, I think with Cyclops also, Cable is his son, but there's some weird time travel conventions that are involved.
Mhm.
Now, speaking of nicknames, we've come to a good point to talk about. In your essay, The Relic, there's a certain boy nicknamed Cerulean. And we've talked a little bit about Cerulean early on. This is a presence, it's core to the year-long compositional interval. Cerulean has been part of the waterspell fabric in the writings when we go backwards in time through the essays since your early teens, but then all the way up to 2025. I'm also thinking about other ways in which this book is looking and investigating companionship, because the collection at one point refers to wordless allies, and this phrase describes the ocean in your ekphrasis on Moana and Spirited Away. And you talked about candles earlier on, and there are some figurines in the book. I mean, even at one point, there's that essay about the writing desk, and there are certain colors of nail polish. These two are wordless allies in Waterspell. And I'm wondering, since the time you've written this book and edited it, and as it is going out into the world, have you gained additional wordless allies?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, like yeah, just really like I thought so much about this. So to just like limit it to a few. I mean, one of them was I guess technically I had this earlier, but like so the man known as Cerulean, my husband now, yeah, like had given me a Sailor Moon pen years ago that I, used to take attendance at my tiny little desk, all through the lockdown, year of teaching. And again, right, it's like that was not deliberate, like foreshadowing. I mean, like again, like was and wasn't, right? Like what is want? Because of course I was like using this pen and being like, oh, I wonder how he's doing, right? But like not looking to like blow up my existing life. So anyway, and that, I mean, that symbol has like stayed with me, right? It's like I still use it. You know, I'm not taking attendance by hand now, but that symbol has certainly like carried through and obviously like taken on new meaning, you know, like now in our life together. Um, so that was one thing. And I mean, it was just a cool touch that it was like, you know, we had both grown up like watching Sailor Moon. Like I've got my Sailor Moon jacket, you know, like that's been a touchstone text in a lot of ways. So the pen for sure, that didn't make it into the memoir, but that has been a powerful wordless ally. As far as new ones, yeah, like this is what most came to mind. I have on my lanyard for work, two pins. I have Agnia from a game called Octopath Traveler 2, and still Sailor Moon. I have Sailor Saturn.
Mhm.
Um, and again, actually, like this kind of goes back to the like Raven and Starfire thing. Like Sailor Saturn, for those who don't know, is, without going into spoilers, like the soldier of death and rebirth, and like she, like in this cast of like fairly like cheerful characters, she's like the angsty one, who suffers a lot. I mean, like they all, you know, suffer because they are in battle, but like she really like suffers on, I would say, like kind of on a deeper level, and just has more like emotional baggage, and so I've, you know, kind of like singled her out like as a kid. Like I love all of them, but I was like, yeah, like she's cool. And Agnia in Octopath Traveler 2 is like the sunshine girl. You know, it's like she's probably like the happiest member of that cast. And I have them both on my lanyard, I think, for balance, I suppose, you know, but it's like that's those have come to me since finishing the book. But I mean, yeah, like I wear my lanyard every day that I teach and have that as a kind of like symmetry of like, you know, yeah, like you can, again, you can feel the heaviness of life and like really like, you know, sit with that and know that everything is a cycle of death and rebirth, and like part of that cycle is death.
Mhm.
So like endings will happen, sadness will happen, but also like, I mean, Agnia is a dancer and a singer and a songwriter in the game, and like her story culminates in the composition of this song called the Song of Hope. And it's like it's like, I mean, again, it gets me in my feelings, and it's very joyful. So yeah.
Which could be a great piece you bring in for Joy Studies.
Yes,
Syllabize that, right?
absolutely.
Well, so you have Captain Marvel that flies, and Wanda can do all her levitating, flying stuff. And it only stands to reason that there would be an essay called Flight, and that's on pages 118 through 119 in the version, the most recent version that I've been reading. So, and when I read it, it just resonated with the hopes that I've invested in academia over the past couple of years. And I have a lengthy excerpt, but it's so darn good. I want to share it with the world because we've been getting this motif of the dream job that's been in there. We see it blooms right and throughout the collection, and now it kind of all comes down to this. In preparing my research talk and teaching demonstration for the job interview, I noticed that the materials drew from many parts of myself. There were things sourced from childhood, like my interest in mythology, things from adolescence, like my interest in anime and manga, things from undergrad, like reading literature through a post-colonial lens, ideas about gender and sexuality from grad school. I drew from books I had read on my own, as well as ones taught in school. I drew from my dissertation and my MFA thesis. It was a synthesis unlike anything I had done before. In past job interviews, I'd emphasized different sides of myself, depending on what the role called for. In this case, I felt balanced, like I was showing up equally as a teacher, researcher, and artist. This kind of synthesis that pulled from so many aspects of my training, formal and informal, analytic and creative, brought to mind an image of crafting a custom sword or vehicle. I felt like a blacksmith poring over different scraps, different metals, bits of ore lay scattered on a table. I heated and fused them together. What resulted was chimeric, part academic, part intuitive, part girl taking pages of notes in classrooms, part daydreamer gazing out the window. I had never made anything like it. It felt risky, experimental. I wasn't sure it would work, but it felt authentic and like something I could not have made any sooner. Something that took every experience up to that point. You know those scenes in movies where the spaceship or plane is hurtling off the cliff and then it flies at the last second, inches from hitting the ground? It's a familiar scene, one I often found unrealistic. Like, really? The last second? that's when it finally works. But this was how it felt. Like the patchwork machine worked at the last possible second. Like I was pushed from a cliff and my machine and I fell. And then at the last second, we flew. When the personal stakes could not have been higher, the engine thrums to life. I totally believe in chimera blacksmithing, pedagogically establishing one's blast furnace with heat from those who've mentored you. So I'm just wondering, what were two pieces of advice you received for your research talk and teaching demonstration? And if one of those advices could be from a creative writing mentor and the other from a lit professor, I am so curious.
Yeah, I think like I mean again, I was given a great gift in the teaching demo for the job I have now because I said I was kind of like, well, what like should it be literature emphasis? Should it be composition? Should it be creative writing? Like I do all three of those. So like what would you like? And the instruction was just like do what you're most excited about. Like tell us about what you're excited about. I was like, great. And so it did. I mean, it was kind of like a synthesis. And so yeah, so I mean that was like one wonderful opportunity that was just like, by nature of the department chair at the time. So as far as the advice that came into play, I think like when I was doing the kind of like, literary studies side of things, I was talking about a book by Linda Berry, called What It Is, which is great. Highly recommend. Love that book. And the advice that had come into mind as I was putting together that part of the talk was from my dissertation advisor, who was Gwen Tarbox, who was at Western Michigan for a while, although I think she has taken a new position recently. And that was that when you're talking about a primary text, you got to give your audience at least a little bit of summary from the jump before you get to your thesis so that they are on board, right? Like, again, like people who are interested in literature are interested in literature. And so, like, you have to get them as excited or at least like give them a little bit of something to hold on to before you start talking about your amazing insights. Otherwise, right, like they're going to be like, okay, like who is this? Or like, okay, like I might be interested in what your thesis is touching on, but like tell me about the story too. And like even though again, right, like at a conference when like we're in our blazers and we're, like getting very serious, like there's that part of literary scholars, I think, that also wants to be like entertained and grabbed by a story. Like that's part of why we do this. And so I thought that was really smart. And again, for those who hadn't read What It Is, I was sure to be like, here's who Linda Berry is, like here's what this book is about, like okay, here's my insight, but like to be very sure to front load the plot summary even if it's brief. I thought that was really smart. And I appreciate it when I hear conference papers that do that now. I'm kind of like, tell me who are these people? What's their drama? Okay, now tell me what you think. I always really appreciate that. So that was one thing. And then the kind of in counterpoint, the piece of creative writing advice was came from the director of my MFA program, Jennifer Militello, who gave a talk one time during my MFA where she basically was saying like the best poems cannot be summarized. And I love that. And I think that's very brilliant. And I think in some ways, like, same is true of any art, right? It's like, yes, we have to do things like query letters. Like, yes, we have to, talk about our artist statement and things like that. It's good to be able to do that. But like, that's different than like a summary. And I agree, like, a good poem hits differently than like a summary of the poem, just like a piece of music. Like, listening to a song is not the same thing as like hearing a summary of a song. So I thought that was really smart. And I think like in that way, even though I was doing this like job talk, I tried to not overanalyze. Like again, like I did like, here's my analytic side. And then I led the committee through a creative writing prompt, which I'd be happy to talk more about later. But again, like that's kind of its own thing. But in the prompt, it was like I left it open and like I allowed room for negative capability to the best of my ability, right? To just kind of be like, I hope that you get something out of this that you can't summarize and that like I can't summarize. Like I hope that art offers you something that goes beyond analysis or is like uses a different part of your brain than analysis. Like both are great. Again, like this isn't to put a hierarchy between them. Like I truly think both are great. But that like art is not the same as analysis and that's okay. I think that was the piece that came in.
Cool. I've been thinking lately about how external mediums can help with close reading when it comes to, say, a literary interpretation course. And classic example would be if one is teaching the yellow wallpaper and we get to that point, and I'm paraphrasing the sentence, I pulled and she pulled, I shook and she shook. And that's when, and I've done this now in two classes where I've shown students an image of a Mobius strip because we just
Mm.
at this point, okay, the narrator and Jane and the unnamed, they could be all. And I one of my jokes is to my undergrads, go knock on the door of any English department and say, who is Jane? And that's the true test. Will the professor, what will they say? Is that definitely the woman, the narrator, or is that the wallpaper woman? And this is from someone who, I swear, the first time I read the yellow wallpaper, I thought the woman in the wallpaper was actually the mistress,
Oh, I like
right?
that. Interesting.
But again, when you bring in the Mobius strip, you show the relationship for what it is, but you
Mhm.
show that there is complexity and you can never truly explain it. And I've also brought in Munch's The Scream to compare that expression with just what the woman in the wallpaper is doing. And I've also done examples where I've sung to my students when we did the bell jar, and there's that, the fig paragraph where Esther's just
Hmm. Hmm.
contemplating what all life could be about. And so I said, fig, 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 fig. So I get all Beethoven fifth with my students, and that's about as musically inclined as it gets. But I'm still thinking that external mediums, I, the more we can tap into those and get our students tapping into them, it will reinforce, it will help them go onto their ledges with their risks in terms of how they want to interpret a piece. And if they want to bring in some piece of music that helps convey the emotional atmosphere of a certain point in the story or poem, more power to them.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
thank
Hmm.
you so much for your time, Catherine. I am grateful for Waterspell. And again, we can find that. Is there a date for the August? And do you have some readings online or in person coming up?
Yes. I the book is going to be out in late August. I mean, like if you, it depends where you're ordering it from, but it should be in hand by August 30th at the latest, or 31st.
Mhm.
Yes, it's coming. There will be an online reading through Cornerstone Press, although that hasn't been scheduled quite yet. But I can pass along the details when I get them. And then yeah, I'm doing a couple readings in the Seattle area and possibly beyond as well. So yeah.
Nice. Well, congratulations. And what was helpful for me is I'm thinking about when go back to teach nonfiction. Right now, I've got on my syllabus Jesmyn Ward, Elizabeth Bales Frank, Sarah Miner, Thomas Mira E. Lopez. And I'm thinking, ooh, maybe if there's an opportunity to put some of Catherine's Waterspell on an upcoming syllabus. And so I'm always on the lookout for how does one constantly evolve in their teaching of, so they're not just bringing in the same poems, the same essays, the same stories. So who are some recent poets and memoirists that have you excitedly building future class reading lists? And novelists too, since I think you've got some story classes on your upcoming 2025-26 horizon.
Mm. Yeah. Um, First off, I wanted to say as a side note, I love the idea of bringing in like, yeah, images and music to the understanding of text. I mean, again, I think like subjects don't exist in vacuums, right? Like again, it's like I'm sure the people who determined what departments are called and how they operate were very smart and had good reasons for doing that, but I can't help but sometimes be like, have a conversation, like these things are not separate, you know. So yes, I am all for multimedia everything. But yeah, a few writers, recent reads. I mean, again, like I to put boundaries on it somehow, but a few recent memoirs I've read were Therese Marie Mailhot's Heartberries, which was lovely, fragmentary memoir. Um, Leslie Jaminson's The Recovering, which was great and takes up like her own journey from addiction to sobriety, as well as like studying famous authors, including John Ashbery, who's come up a couple times, and Raymond Carver. Like it was a very, very fascinating read for anyone, I think, who has loved someone or cared about someone who has dealt with substance use. Maggie Smith's memoir, You Could Make This Place Beautiful, of course, was great. Again, like I swear I had finished a draft of my book before I knew that book was coming out, but I was not sad when I heard it was coming out. It takes up a lot of the same life events, actually. And so it has been a great model to kind of like, know is out there and feel reassured by. as far as poets, again, Tracy Brimhall's Love Prodigal, similarly, like some of the same life events, although it's about many things. That's a gorgeous book. I read Sharon Olds' Stag's Leap thanks to your comparison.
Mhm.
I had read many things by Sharon Olds. I had not actually read Stag's Leap somehow, but I read it and of course adored it. January Gill O'Neill's book Glitter Road, again deals with some similar life events and is gorgeous. And again is not just about the end of a relationship, but is about many things. What else? As far as other writers, Lisa Marie Basil had a book come out this year called Saint of, which I think is just like a great example of negative capability. It deals with a lot like that book contains multitudes for sure. And a writer I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in conversation here somewhere is Janine Hall Gailey.
Mhm.
Who okay yeah you know okay yeah Janine Hall Gailey like is one of my favorite writers because she does such a great job of straddling the literary and the speculative, and again like honoring the impulses of both. Like her stuff is so reflective and so interesting and so in conversation with pop culture. Like she has a poem in the voice of Poison Ivy from Batman, like stuff like that, and it's gorgeous and is about the environment and like the destruction of the environment. And I just admire her a lot and feel like I have to mention her in this conversation since we're talking about all this like literary pop culture
Based in
fusion.
the Pacific Northwest, right?
Yes,
Yep.
yes,
Mhm.
yes. Yes, since moving back to the Northwest, I joined Janine's book club and I feel
Nice.
like I'm like meeting a celebrity. So that's cool. But
Well,
yeah, those are a few.
nice. And what's been interesting, I've picked up on a little bit of a thread that, I mean, it's really cool, and my mind just kind of works in free associative mode. So you were talking about Keats's negative capability, and I'm thinking, okay, so there's then the digital folklore, and then DigiPen Institute. So have you ever thought about what it would be like to, I mean, digital capability, where you take the Keatsian capability, and I mean, yes, everything in this world now has digital capability, but if we just transcended that and then took digital capability and poeticized it, and my gosh, it's not in the interview script, but that would be just such an interesting kind of, what do you think about a genre of digital capability, or digital capability as a new way of poetry as it evolves in the year 2025 and the next kind of cluster of years?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's fascinating. I think like that the game I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to pronounce the S or not. I mean, it's a game that was made in Spain, but I think it's the French word for gray, so it's like gris, but it's spelled GRIS. I think that is doing a lot of work on the frontier. I also think I mean, for one thing, again, it's like what separates that game from just like a cool piece of animation that's dealing with the levels of grief or something like that is the interactivity. So I
Mm.
think like combining motion, music, images, and interactivity into like and fusing all of that with poetry is very exciting, an exciting realm of possibilities. Again, like I am not a game designer myself at this stage, speaking in, June of 2025. I would love to learn more about game design myself.
Mhm.
Because again, I think there are lots of really fascinating possibilities. Not just on the level of like technology, like not just to be kind of like, oh, let's make something new for the sake of something new, but like that actually have the possibility of like engaging with art and meaning and existence in ways that like we haven't seen before.
Mhm.
So I think it's really cool. I think it's a fascinating possibility.
Definitely. And to get a little philosophical, it seems like the one little syllable that keeps following me around wherever I teach. And so I've been teaching since the 2010. So I remember at University of Southern Mississippi, there were a lot of kinesiology majors. And then it seems like at Western Michigan University, there's a kinetic imaging program. So just the KIN. And it's just so
Mm-hmm.
interesting how what that syllable, the purpose it served study area wise in the 2010s versus the purpose that syllable serves now in the 2020s. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
just,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to, at first I had to, when I was hearing about these students that were kinetic imaging, at first I thought, oh, so is it combining kinesiology and anatomy and some sort of imaging? But no, it's just kind of like the illustration and the drawing and the graphics and the imaging. So one of those syllables to just keep an eye out for in the 2030s to see what it does next.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool.
Well, on that note, this has been an awesome afternoon, and I'm so grateful that we got to talk about water spell and the ways in which fairy tales and digitization, and it's all coalescing. And thank you, thank you for being as one of the leading voices in that field.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and yeah, just like I appreciate the true thoughtfulness and insight of the questions. Like I had a really great time thinking about them, and it feels amazing to have so much like care paid to this book. It's I've been working on it in relative isolation for 4 years now, really. I mean, like I said, like writing it for one and fine-tuning it for another three. And so I'm excited for it to come out, and it was very affirming to have you spend time with it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Have a
And
great
everybody should
afternoon.
check out John's new chapbook too, The Orchid in Lieu of a Horse.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. All righty. Well, have a wonderful rest of your summer. And yeah, let us know when those dates come out for readings, and we will happily plug it on our social media when we critique. Thank you,
Awesome. Thank
everybody.
you.
Yep, this has been the
Have a good
interview
afternoon.
series. Yep, cool. All righty.